All right, so my name's Denise Baden. I'm Professor of Sustainable Practice at the University of Southampton, but I also have a side hustle as eco-fiction author. I set up the Green Stories project to encourage people to embed green solutions in their stories. I've done quite a lot of research on how different ways of getting messages over are received, and that's fed in to my approach. Um, I set up Habitat Press, which is an imprint which supports the Green Stories project. And basically, I guess I'm a bit of a climate activist. So that's my focus. I'm worried that we're not doing enough, and really, a lot of it is about the messaging. So I'll be talking a little bit about that today. I've got to confirm my speaking language here. It says I'm speaking Spanish. Right, let me do that. So I'm going to share my screen and take you through some of the projects, what we've learned from them, what that means if you want to sort of write to change the world, and some do's and don'ts. And towards the end, we'll have a bit of an interactive session. So let me just share my screen. There we are. Okay, so is everyone seeing the presentation? Great. So it does mean I've got it on the other screen, so I won't be looking at you, I'll be looking away. I think I've already gone through the introduction. So the Green Stories competition is going from strength to strength. We've run 20 free competitions, resulting in about 15 publications, either directly or indirectly. I'm on the Forbes list of climate leaders changing the TV and film industry, which was a bit of an honour to find myself on. So researcher, activist, author. So I'm going to start with a question for you. And to be honest with this audience, I think I know the answer I'm going to get, which might be different from the typical one. I did some research into how news stories land with viewers, and they were exposed to different kinds of stories. One which focuses on the problem. So you've got images here of turtles swimming in plastic, caught up in nets. I mean, who doesn't remember that heartbreaking sequence with the whale with its dead baby? And so I showed them these kinds of images and stories, and I showed them another one on a project to clean up the oceans. And I want you to guess, and you can put it in the chat, which one you think was most likely to inspire intentions to actually do something about it. See if I can see the chat here. Yeah. Oh, but which gets the clicks. Good point, Paul. So when I asked most people, certainly when I started doing this a few years ago, almost everyone thought the second one. And no, the first one. So most people think that really we need to show the problem so people become aware of it, and then they will do something about it. But my research showed very clearly that showing how we may address the problem and people engaging in solutions was much more likely to actually prompt intentions to do something about it. So I did it across a number of different contexts: environment, a poverty-related issue, a peace versus war-related issue. And I asked them, having seen this news clip and read the news story, how likely are you, so for the environment one, to become more environmentally friendly yourself, to campaign for environmental policies, to make your opinion known? And significantly, to a large extent, the solution-focused stories were much more likely to lead people to do that. So, and what seemed to happen was the negative ones raised awareness, but it also led to a kind of some people switched off or they thought nothing could be done. It seemed to limit their sense of agency. The negative ones also gave rise, unsurprisingly, to more anxiety, more depression, more pessimism, and the positive ones, more optimism, more positive mood and so on, especially amongst female respondents, which was interesting. So they seem to be particularly sensitized to being put off by the more negative problem-focused stories. So again, and one of the ways you can understand that is when you look at probably the most researched, most well-used model of behavior. The idea is that behavior is a product of our attitudes and our beliefs, our subjective norm. That's, what other people approve of, what everyone else seems to be doing, what is the norm, and our perceived behavioral control, like our agency. So, for example, if we're talking recycling, if you want people to recycle, they need positive attitudes towards recycling. They need to feel that they would be judged harshly if they didn't recycle and that it is the norm to recycle. But most importantly, they need a recycling bin nearby. And pretty well everything, there's been so many studies, especially on things like sustainable consumption and buying behavior, which show the massive attitude behavior gap. And I've been involved in this research myself. Everyone says, if you sort of give them a choice, would you like to, buy greener stuff or help? Everyone says yes, but it doesn't necessarily translate into behavior. The real drivers of behavior are giving people a sense of agency and social norms. But almost all communications focus on changing attitudes. So this can be problematic because it's not the most effective way. It can even backfire sometimes. One of the things that opened my eyes to this was when I was teaching business ethics to a load of students. And the typical way you do that is to teach, say, a business ethics scandal. You give a cautionary tale of a business that behaved badly and things went horribly wrong. And then one student came up to me afterwards and said, they seemed to think I was teaching them how to behave unethically in order to get ahead. And no, that wasn't the message I was hoping to communicate. So I did some research where in the lectures, they all got the same theoretical models, but in the classes, half were exposed to positive role models of ethical businesses, exemplars, people involved in sustainability management would come and give talks. And the other one was the normal business ethics scandal one. And then I asked them what their attitudes were, how able they felt to be ethical, and so on, and what their intentions were. And it seemed quite clear that those who were exposed to the positive role models felt they knew how business could be ethical. They saw other people behaving ethically, so it tapped into the social norm, and were much more inclined to be ethical themselves. Those who engaged with the scandals developed quite high cynicism, and cynicism was correlated with unethical intentions. So like none of us here might think we'd cheat in an exam. But if we believed that most other people were cheating, then we wouldn't want to be the sucker left behind by being the only good guy. So there is this sense that if you think other people are all behaving badly, you're likely to do the same. And we often get that wrong. So when we're trying to affect behavior, like it might be drinking behavior, if you have messages showing students, for example, rolling around drunk and throwing up in basically Southampton on a Saturday night, and then like say, don't drink, these are the terrible things that happen. The unconscious message that gets through is everyone drinks, that's normal. And that can be a more powerful influence of behavior than but you shouldn't. So that can explain some of these findings. So we're very much affected by role models, what we see other people doing. I'm still sliding down the screen here a bit. So there's three common mistakes when people are trying to communicate. something, the focus is on raising awareness, and that doesn't always lead to behavior change or the kind of change you hope for. So, for example, when we're talking about climate crisis, the typical approach is to try and scare people green, to say, to point out the terrible things that will happen unless we urgently change our behavior. Now, the trouble is that isn't necessarily going to lead to people giving up beef and flying and campaigning for climate policies. It's more likely, if you are familiar with the psychology of fear, to lead to behaviors such as voting for far-right populist leaders who will then put all the blame on, say, immigrants. Prepping responses, buying up the toilet rolls. It's not necessarily going to lead to the kind of behavior you hope for. Another issue that I want to talk about is sometimes it's about preaching to the converted. We end up in our echo chambers and we're putting out all these positive messages, but only to the people who are already in our networks, who already agree with us. So we might feel we're being very, very busy, but we're basically just talking to ourselves. So I'm going to talk about that later. And another common mistake is not knowing our facts. So one of the mistakes I made early on was when I was doing a project on sustainable hairdressing. I thought that, so pretty well half the goods I'd say you have in the supermarket have palm oil in. And palm oil destruction, contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, habitat loss, air pollution, all kinds of bad things. So the typical response of business is to say, well, don't buy this product, use a product that hasn't got it in. But if we all switched from palm oil to, say, coconut oil or something different, we'd solve one problem by then creating another. And then there was this idea of sustainable palm oil, where big plantations were certified sustainable. But you go and look at them, and their metrics are exactly the same for the amount of habitat loss, poor working conditions, fires. They're not sustainable in reality. So I got all excited about sustainable palm oil, but then when I looked into it, it wasn't. The only solution was consuming less, actually. So when you're putting out a message or taking it upon yourself to try and change the world, especially if you have a platform, just double check your stuff. Don't use AI. It's got it wrong several times, and I've seen it miscite my research as well. So one of the ways I was talking about my sustainable hairdressing project, I got engaged in that because I wanted to find a way to move out of the echo chambers, move away from preaching to the converted, and focus on actual behavior. So this began over 10 years ago, and we found we worked out that hairdressers probably talk to more people in the course of their profession than pretty well any other occupation. And they also talk about a topic that actually has high environmental implications. Running hot water is one of the most energy intensive things we do in our home. And so if you are shampooing, rinsing, repeating, shampooing every day, your carbon footprint is going to be very, very high. If you shampoo just once rather than twice, which is all you need to do, shampoo twice a week, supplement with dry shampoo if you need to, use leave-in conditioner if you need to. We're not talking about a 10 or 20% difference. We're talking about the difference between 25 kilograms carbon dioxide versus 579. These are not marginal. So we engaged with hairdressers, and again, we tried to focus on the solutions. What do you do? And so we got the behaviors, we capture them in little mini character vignettes that people can identify with. And we find a way to point out all the win-wins. So you don't necessarily have to be playing the green card. Washing your hair less often, using less shampoo, it saves time, it saves money, it saves energy, it saves water, it's kinder on your skin and hair. A lot of people don't know that standing under very hot showers washes off all the friendly bacteria that keeps your skin healthy. It's a power shower and very hot. It opens the pores up and makes the skin even more exposed to whatever chemicals you're putting on it. And things like shower gel are particularly harsh, and many shampoos are very harsh. So So it's a question of getting that across in a way that people can understand and affects their actual behaviour. And we use these eco tips on mirrors. And again, as a way of communicating that and encouraging conversations between clients and hang on, what's that there? Can you still see my PowerPoint? All right, good. Something else came up on screen there. So another way we tried to find, we were looking at what works best, telling people what to do or telling people what not to do. So we wanted to find a really fun way to reach new groups of people via social media and try and get them to join the dots between their behaviours and the impacts on the planet, but also raise awareness of the role of fictional characters in setting our aspirations. So we did this project called #ClimateCharacters with BAFTA. And it was fun. So you've got James Bond with his single-use sports car and his walk-in wardrobe of luxury suits. You know, he has a huge carbon footprint to kill the bad guys. Versus Jack Reacher, who travels by bus, only shops in second-hand shops, much lower carbon footprint. So that was fun. And we tied it to a survey on whether people thought they were influenced by characters on the screen. And quite a few people thought, yes, it did. They were influenced, just under half, or they thought if they weren't influenced, maybe their children were or people they knew were. People said, yes, it might affect their aspirations, make them want to have higher fashion or drive fast cars. And quite a few of them thought it was slightly jarring now to continue to present these kind of high impact, high carbon lifestyles as aspirational. So this is a little bit on the radar, but what was more interesting, I thought, was the little pilot study we did when trying to find out what images would work. So we found that if we just showed the James Bond one, it was funny. So the humour kind of covered up the slight preachy element, but some people did still feel it was a bit finger waggy. So there was a slight triggered defensive response. If you just show the Jack Reacher one, yeah, it's kind of funny, but it doesn't necessarily help you join the dots. But having them both together and a bit of humour seems to really work quite well. So what not to do, what to do, and a little bit of humour seems to be a good package. That's some research I'd quite like to follow up just to see if our sort of anecdotal, findings from the pilot study do hold water. So I also did some research on short stories. So we exposed readers to 4 flash fiction, really short stories, with a green theme, with a climate theme. 2 of them involved solutions, and 2 of them were very much problem focused, much more catastrophic focus. Completely replicated the results of the new study. So the negative ones did inspire a few to action, but just as many actually were switched off. They said it made them feel scared or guilty or avoidant, so it also triggered quite negative responses. And when it did lead to some kind of intention to act, it's much more passive, like I feel something should be done or everything's going to hell. Whereas the positive, more solution-focused ones were very much, oh, right, this has given me the idea of what I can do. This has inspired me to go off and do similar. So I've done this research with news and with stories with students and with the general population. I've done it with surveys, tick boxes, and I've done it with qualitative feedback. And the results have been very, very consistent. More catastrophic negative ones do inspire few, but just as many are switched off, whereas the positive ones seem to be much more effective. So this is a problem because we're doing it all wrong. So this is a friend of mine, Steve Willett. He compiled this and he did a sort of a matrix of plausibility versus dystopia, utopia. And there's pretty well nothing in the plausible and sort of positive field when we're looking at the future. He's got his book there, Fairhaven, in there. So, and when you look at climate communications in the news and so on, it is again mostly catastrophic focus. So for those who are inspired by fear, and there's plenty of us, we are already well served. But for those who switch off or go into avoidance or denial or unintended consequences, there's really not much in that field that will engage people. So this is something that I aim to address. And I thought, building on my kind of psychology background, I thought if you divide people into low eco-anxiety or high eco-anxiety, or low agency and high agency, there's quite a few people, especially young people, who are really suffering from climate anxiety. It's a growing problem. They're having nightmares, there's lack of hope for the future. I've got a PhD student who's so worried about it, he can barely eat. And so that's not a nice place to be. There's those, and I probably put myself in this category where, I feel there are things I can do. I'm very, very worried. And then there's risk of burnout because you feel so much needs to be done. And you throw yourself at it. But if you go in too hard, you can alienate others. It's a bit like that scene in Don't Look Up, where Jennifer Lawrence says, "Can't you see you're all going to die?" and completely alienates the audience. So there's quite a few people, low eco-anxiety, low agency, just not on their radar, don't think about it. So I try and think that in all our communications, what's been nice is to try and get people into that sense of calm, effective action. Can we avoid triggering the paralyzing anxiety? Can we avoid burnout? And can we go straight to let's crack on with what works? And that was really the goal behind the Green Storage Project. And I set it up in 2018. And the goal was to try and create a cultural body of work that either kind of embedded sustainable solutions and behaviors in the context of mainstream genre fiction. So almost like a bit like product placement. So, it might be a rom-com, it might be a thriller, it might be a whodunit. But, the characters are cycling, they're eating vegetables, they're just shopping secondhand. They're just sort of norming that kind of behavior. Or if they're set in the future, showcase positive visions of what a sustainable society might look like if we do it well. Or showcase some of the transformational ideas that might get us there. So we've run, like I said, 23 competitions. One of the ones we did with No More Fairy Tale Stories to Save Our Planet, we teamed writers with climate experts to come up with 24 short stories, each with a climate solution at its heart. And it works. So for example, despite having very clear guidance on what we wanted, because there were free competitions, very few books actually, very few entries really focused on the solutions. Writers were still focusing on the problems. Like, for example, we had quite a few writing about rainforest destruction, people running off to, take on evil rainforest loggers. First, they're not evil. They're quite often almost bonded slaves. It's a systemic issue. And second, there's the carbon footprint of the flight, and your average reader isn't going to do that. Much more effective would be to promote, say, a meat-free diet or, looking at where your wood comes from. So I, in the end, wrote my first novel. I thought I was inspired to try and write something myself. And I was inspired by a local green garden consultant who'd retired early to help make people's gardens wildlife friendly. And he came over and he told me, all right, I can put a water butt up there, get rid of your bamboo. Let's have a hawthorn hedge and create a wildlife area at the back. It can screen, grow your grass long, pollinator-friendly plants. Don't do pesticides. And he wanted to do every garden in the world, but he felt very limited by what he could do. So I thought, well, I could write a book. I thought of it initially as a TV series, So I sort of threw in a love story. I threw in a body that he could dig up in the garden. So it was a bit of cozy mystery, bit of a rom-com. A body gives me the opportunity to talk then about natural burial. So why put a lot of good hardwood into the ground when you can use a lovely locally grown willow coffin? Why put all those chemicals in the ground? And the University of Utah and the English department at the University of Southampton did some research, and they followed 50 readers through the book. And then a month later, they asked them what behavior it had affected. And 98% had changed their attitudes. That's easy. But 60% had adopted at least one green alternative, with the average being 4 green alternatives. So, but I didn't want it to be preachy. So in every scene, there was always something to keep the reader happy. So, in the gardens with a love interest, they're seeing the loved one playing out. In the chapter with a polyamorist, I'm talking about home composting, but the reader's waiting for the lady to make a move on our hero. In the Wizard of Woolston wants a habitat for bats and frogs. So while our hero is talking about a pond, the reader's wondering is there going to be any fun magic going on? There's the mystery of the body in the garden. And I'm going to give an example of, how we talked about the natural burial scene, because a number of people wrote to me afterwards saying, after seeing the burial scene, they changed their will to require a natural burial. And I did have a scene in the book with a court case where there's an opportunity to talk about, how unenvironmentally friendly traditional burials are, with the formaldehyde that literally poisons the earth and the hardwood. No one referred to that. They referred to the scene where you actually saw it take place, which for any writers among you is a real example that showing, not telling, is what works best. So this is Dave Goulston, who set up the Bumblebee Conservation Trust and is Professor of Biology at the University of Sussex.
Hi, I'd like to read.
Just check. Can you all see that? Well, could you see it before?
They can't hear it.
You could, right, let me try again. Hold on. I might just have to stop share and share again. Hold on. So let's put that there. Can you see the video? And let's see if you can hear it now. Can you hear it?
An extract from Habitat. The music of the garden took over from the fiddles. Undeterred by the crowd, a tiny brown wren, tail cocked in the air, trilled its liquid song from the new willow fence. Nearby, a chiff-chaff chanted the repetitive call of its name. A queen bumblebee bird, her legs loaded with balls of pollen for her hungry offspring. A brimstone butterfly fluttered by, investigating the flowers on the willow bower, its bright yellow wings a flash of sunshine. A roar of a plane flying overhead reminded us that we weren't in the deep countryside, but in a suburban small garden underneath the flight path from the airport a few miles down the road. When the plane had passed, we tuned again into the sounds of nature. After a few moments, Fern nodded at Andrew and Daisy, and together they carefully lifted the willow curtain down from the branches and walked it to the end of the garden. I steeled myself to look, but it wasn't the deep, dark, rectangular coffin-shaped hole I'd pictured in my head. The hole in the ground was just as I'd left it, pond-shaped and 3 feet deep, except now Grandad, as I thought of him, was laid out in his baggy trousers and a colourful knitted jumper in the willow coffin, surrounded by the bones of his wife. I exhaled with relief. This was absolutely right. The shallow pond-shaped hole was like nature's opening arms, welcoming them back to the earth. Thank you.
So I can get out of there.
We've been lied to.
Go away.
This is the worst I've ever seen it. This is a place where people are so...
All right, see if I can try and get back to my PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint again? Great. Um, so, well, one thing I want to walk onto now is talk about the Throughtopian approach. Are people familiar with that term? Right. Throughtopia, I think it's a term coined by Rupert Reed. If anyone is on LinkedIn, I've got a creative climate communication post there on Throughtopia and what it means. And the way I understand it, it's again about imagining what a sustainable society might look like and then working backwards to see how we might get there. So it's not utopian, it's about the process. So we're going to do an exercise now. And I want you all to shut your eyes. And I want you to take a couple of minutes. And I want you to bypass your rational mind and with your heart and your soul, dream. Imagine it's 10 years in the future. The world has done an about turn, and it's exactly as you'd love it to be. Walk through your transformed neighborhood. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? How do you feel? What are other people doing? So we're just going to have 2 minutes now.
Bildschirmfoto. Bildschirmfoto. Bildschirmfoto.
Might be time to go on mute if you're not already. Right, that's 2 minutes. Would anyone like to share what they dreamed about? Either come out of mute or put it in the chat. What was the world like for you when you imagined it perfect? Yes? Quieter, slower, still surprising. Butterflies, kitchen gardens, clean streets, communities helping each other. Thank you, Kay. Thank you, Paul. Anyone else?
I can connect to the kitchen gardens. I live in a village outside of a village,
Mhm.
and there's a huge green area, especially now in springtime. But I miss people, even myself, to do the gardening for ourselves to build to grow my own vegetables. Um, I have sheep, so for me it's a little bit more difficult, but I would like to see the people around here come and really live in the nature and together with nature.
It's funny, I've done this a few times. It's one I sort of nicked from Rob Hopkins. And people say such similar things. It's like we have a longing for nature, a longing for community. No one ever says they want more shops. And I did wonder, is it just because I'm often doing things with a climate theme or that audience? But I've tried it on other people too. And it's the same thing. And there's something quite powerful about articulating a vision of what it could be like. It can create a yearning in your soul that can lead to something that you want to make happen. And it's amazing how rarely we take time to think about what we'd like. We think about what we don't want. When do we ever really think about what we love? So this can be quite a powerful exercise to do. So now what I think could be the next step is to think with your head and think what kinds of policies or practices might get us to that point. So you've got a vision in your head of a more closer to nature world, a world with community. How might we get there? How might we come from where we are now to there? What might have to happen on a local level, a national level, a global level, maybe a psychological level? What might have to happen? So have a little think. Has anyone got any suggestions of what might move us closer to that? Put them in the chat or just take a moment to think.
Paul raised his hand. Please.
All right, it's gone, Paul, to speak.
Thank you. There's something about, as you've started to do, what do people want in common with their desired future? Knowing what good looks like and finding those common elements, which might be nature or other aspects. And then having a conversation or conversations about where we already find that. Where do these things exist? And how we might get closer, a bit closer to them, which is where I think your current question comes in.
Yeah.
So there's maybe an intermediate step or two to consolidate a community that's interested in this and maybe willing to contemplate it or do some things about it together, and to find some examples of where it does happen, has happened, bits of it have happened. So we've got something tangible to build on rather than it being totally speculative.
Yeah, that's true. See what's already working around the world. And this is where our news really lets us down.
Absolutely.
Because so much is about what isn't working. We don't ever get to see what is. So I think one tangible action might be to, ask for some more constructive ones. So I think fiction is another way. So yes, see what works in practice. But we got Anna. Great, another person. Come and speak, Anna. Demute yourself.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I was thinking in very practical steps, like if you would like to have a community that helps each other out, you could, like, I live in a very big city, and so we started a chat group
Yeah.
just for our house. And then we started to like do very low level activities, like just meet in our tiny little garden that isn't very pretty, but just like get together and like have a vegan barbecue and just like get together and have a karaoke evening, just like in your immediate surroundings, find people to spend time with, and then you could like share ideas and talk about the things that you feel passionate about or what the future might look like, and how you could transform your neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a good idea. There's it makes me think of the shared shed initiative, where I think it's mostly for blokes to get together and chat, but also over the idea of sharing garden tools. So I quite like that because I like the idea of a sharing economy because it's less resource intensive, but it also builds that sense of community. So I've kind of used fiction as a way because I think one of the things that our governments and businesses can't talk about is reducing consumption. And trying to fight climate change is like trying to, cool down a bath with the hot tap still on, with economic growth as the hot tap. It's very hard for politicians to talk about because the narrative of economic growth is so embedded. Businesses, make their profits from selling stuff, but there are alternative business models that don't rely on that. So I was thinking about what I think would work, and I thought our current representative democracy is kind of a bit co-opted by vested interests. Democracy is at the mercy of those with access to information who control the information, and that's the people with the most money and Russian bots or whatever. So most of the recent elections have been won on mostly misinformation to a large extent. And also, they think so short term. So they're tied to 4-year electoral cycles where things like the climate crisis operate beyond that. So I became to believe that our current system is constitutionally incapable of prioritizing existential threats to humanity over things that are more immediate, but actually less important. So I've been quite excited by citizens' assemblies, where you bring people together who represent the society as a whole. They act a bit like a sort of large jury and they debate topics. They're informed by experts. And we had one in where I live, a climate assembly. And those who were involved in it were so buzzing with how it made them feel to be sat across someone with very different opinions, but to be able to debate calmly with a sort of someone chairing it, making sure everyone had their say in a respectful environment. So different to the divisive, party politics and so on. So, and there is a proposal to replace the House of Lords with the House of Citizens. And citizens' assemblies, have actually proper power in Belgium, and they're growing in other European countries. So it seemed to me that was a promising way to supplement our current representative democracy with some direct participation. So I thought, because you can't ignore power if you want to make change. You have to look at who has power and who's making the decisions and in whose interests. So I set whodunit in a citizens' assembly on climate, where 8 people are debating climate policies. And I picked the kinds of policies that address issues of consumption, because again, that's something politicians won't talk about. And a murder, it's the most popular genre of whodunit. So that was a really nice way to showcase what I thought might be some transformative changes to our infrastructure and our systems that might enable more climate-friendly decisions to be made. And it did exactly what I'd hoped for. It engaged audiences, and they left afterwards saying that they wanted to follow up on the policies they heard. So I've got a little video that showcases, what, turned out to be quite a good way to, communicate some of the issues. Shout out if it doesn't appear. Hold on. I might have to put it on this one. Here we are.
And a little intense.
This show is called Murder in the Citizens' Jury, and it imagines 8 people in a citizens' assembly on climate, and then there's a murder.
Good evening. There was some cracking beach weather to be had across many parts of the UK.
Temperatures reaching more than 40 degrees Celsius.
And be warned, it is going to get hotter, which has caused the Met Office and Public Health England to issue warnings.
The show is a locked room murder. So there's lots of drama, obviously, because these people, as is the case with citizens' assemblies, are all drawn from different parts of the world, different age, gender, class. So naturally, when they're debating these policies, there's going to be some fun conflict.
Personal carbon allowances.
So the show, I think it's a double-edged thing, really. It's sort of the moral, sort of social dilemma versus the law dilemma, I suppose, where what would you do in this situation? It's a bit of a whodunit, a bit of a mystery. And also it's tackling much greater issues of climate policies and procedures, issues on a sort of personal scale and also on a global scale as well, which is quite important.
So the things that we explore in this play are libraries of things, on-demand buses, repair cafes and the repair bill, and then personal carbon allowances as well, which could be really transformational. And I love it because not only could they benefit the environment, but actually I thought these are going to be great things for us in our everyday lives.
I like this idea.
Well, it's an issue that's not going to go away, so we have to talk about it and we have to put a message across to the audience, because sometimes you can watch a documentary or you can listen to a news report and you just don't get it. Performing arts has always been a way of communicating a message to people.
Those insects are like the stitches of my knitting. Everything falls apart without them.
I like the idea of a world where we take care of stuff.
Shouldn't be such an alien concept, I suppose.
Yeah, there are comedy moments in it. The attitude, of course, of Needles, who is an old woman, so she harks back to the old days of, well, this is only 25 years old and you want me to throw it away?
In the 80s, you were a key member of the Deadly Knitshade group.
It all just builds up to this sort of more climactic darkness in the whole show, where it's been a bit sort of light and a bit more airy, and then it just turns. You're like, oh gosh, what's going to happen next? How is it going to end?
The audience is allowed to select literally the ending of the play and the final outcome. And it's been interesting to see how they voted differently on each night.
What? You're right. One man shouldn't have to make this decision alone.
No, that's why we have courts.
So ask them. What? Ask them.
Yes, you shall be my court. You shall be the judge. Yes, but don't take too long.
I know people have been discussing this play. In fact, I had some friends message me the next day to say they were still discussing the issues in it. So it's really cleverly written. I think it's really worthwhile.
I thought it was really exciting and very fast-paced and fun.
It was fantastic, and it makes me reflect a lot in terms of what would be a good idea.
Absolutely loved it. It was really inspiring, some amazing ideas that I hadn't even thought of. I feel quite passionate about the whole thing actually after watching that.
Yeah. Can you see the slideshow again? For some reason that's it. Good. So that did quite well. So that's an example of trying to sort of write a play that engaged people. So it's royalty free at the moment because it's funded by the British Academy. So our local student theatre group is going to be putting it on next year. This was just a local Amdram society. if anyone's involved with any theatre groups, professional or amateur, or in their sort of university or college, and they'd like the script, get in touch. I'm quite keen for it to be staged more widely. I'll sort of move on a bit because we're running out of time. So I just want to finish by saying, I think one way to go is we need a jigsaw of solutions. Anyone in their own little space can engage with the people around them. So, and I've got a little bit of details here. All the books I mentioned are available to buy on Habitat Press. And one of the things I did want to say is we've got a new Green Stories competition coming out. I'm just waiting to confirm it. Will be launching it soon, but we're going to talk about epiphanies. So it's going to be a flash fiction competition where you write, it makes under a few hundred words, a moment where you thought about something differently. So for example, the other day I was saying to my partner, we're discussing where to go on holiday. He said, why don't we fly to Zurich, go walking in the mountains? I said, let's get the train. And he said, no, it takes too long. And then his neighbour gave him a book on epic train journeys as a thanks for looking after her cat. And we were looking through this lovely journey in Europe with viaducts and gorges. I said, oh, should we do that one? And he looked at it, he said, no, it's too short. So that's a tiny little story, and it's completely reframed slow travel from something, tedious to something you really want to relish and enjoy. So clearly that has environmental implications. So if anyone fancies themselves a flash fiction author, check out the Green Stories competitions. Let me see if I can get a link up in the chat. We haven't officially launched it yet, but it should be out any moment. So there. I'll just do it to all. Meeting group chat. There we are. So that's it. And if anyone's got any questions, please let me know.